Welcome to Unlocking Vulnerability, the podcast that explores what vulnerability really looks like in everyday life. I'm Helen, and in each episode I'm joined by a different guest who'll bring their unique insight and perspectives from across the vulnerability space. We'll discuss the realities behind vulnerability and what it takes to respond when people need additional support. We're glad to have you here, so grab a cup of tea and let's get started. Before we begin this first episode of the new series of Unlocking Vulnerability, I wanted to share that this year marks something really special for me. This year is the 10-year anniversary of Helen Pettifer Training, 10 years of working alongside organisations, teams and individuals to better understand vulnerability, to respond with compassion and to do the right thing when it matters most. When I started this work a decade ago, conversations about vulnerability were often uncomfortable, inconsistent, or happening quietly behind the scenes. To see how far this space has come and to have been part of that journey is something I'm incredibly proud of. This podcast relaunch is one of the ways I'm choosing to celebrate this progress. Over the last 10 years, we've seen real change, better understanding of consumer vulnerability, stronger partnerships, more open conversations about well-being, and a growing recognition that empathy and professionalism go hand in hand. Unlocking vulnerability has always been about learning, sharing, and challenging ourselves to do better, and this new series continues that commitment. It's a chance to reflect on how far we've come, to spotlight the people driving change, and to keep pushing the conversation forward for the decade ahead. So let's grab a cup of tea and get started with our first episode. I'm thrilled to be joined for this first episode by my colleague, Jenna Birchall. Hello, Jenna. It's wonderful to have you join me on this momentous occasion.
Thank you for having me, Helen.
I'm really looking forward to our discussion and just to hear your thoughts of what's happened over the last 10 years within the vulnerability space. So before we get sort of deep into conversation then, do you want to start by giving a brief introduction to you and your role at Helen Pettifer Training?
Yeah, definitely. So thank you for having me. So hi everybody, my name's Jenna Birchall. I'm a vulnerability consultant working with and for Helen Pettifer. So I've been with Helen almost 2 years now, so it's gone so quick. Prior to that, I worked for 16 years in the financial services sector, but my role at Helen Pettifer is so I'm a vulnerability consultant. So I really work with differing clients across differing sectors, just to really help them with embedding their vulnerability strategy and ethics, and all of the good things that they want to deliver for their customers. So very much like A to Z. So I'll wear the hat of, compliance and regulatory expectations, but also with my previous role, before I worked with Helen, I had a number of roles such as obviously a customer service agent myself, team manager, etc., customer service manager. So I like to think I can wear both hats when I'm working with our clients and have a really well-rounded view of how to make it work for their customers, but also for their colleagues too.
Brilliant. So you've been working in this space slightly longer than I have actually then, if I set up 10 years ago, and you mentioned you've been working in this longer. So looking back over the 10 years then, we really have come a long way, haven't we, really, when we think about vulnerability and regulators and firms and just people's insights and understanding of vulnerability. So how would you describe the shift that we've seen since sort of over the years with regards to vulnerability?
Yeah, I think so different to what it was 10 years ago, Helen. I think just speaking from like my personal experience, if I were to look back 10 years ago, the almost like the topic or the terminology, vulnerable customer or supporting customers in vulnerable circumstances wasn't really a thing. It was more with regards to treating customers fairly and the principles that were outlaid at the time, specifically from the regulatory sector. But it was almost like there was a gap in terms of, well, what does that mean? So what does that mean for me as an agent in actually supporting the person that I'm speaking to on the phone? So I think now, if we move on 10 years, there's a increased awareness around vulnerability, what it actually means, in terms, that it can affect any one of us at any time in differing means and ways. And it's a topic that's known, so there's a lot more awareness around it and why it's important that we are able to support people who are in vulnerable circumstances. I feel it's transitioned very much from framework and policies, which I think probably from my perspective, that was more the focus 10 years ago, making sure you've got in place a checklist to make sure that your organisation is doing all of the things in relation to treating customers fairly. Whereas now it's a lot more humanised, understood, and I feel the principles are being put into practice easier for
Mhm.
organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. So similar thoughts to what I had, and I think you're absolutely right that we're seeing that the regulators are really changing the emphasis now of, yeah, it's not about process, it's not about those frameworks, it is about that's a human, that's a human at the end of the phone, that's a human at the end of that customer journey. What does that look like for them? What have they got going on in their lives? When you think about vulnerability over the last 10 years, it really has changed, hasn't it? Historically, you would think it was, the definition of vulnerability would be somebody who is disabled, an elderly person, somebody with a mental health condition. But now even the definition has broadened into so many different circumstances that people are being impacted by.
Yeah.
It's Yeah, so a lot of awareness has happened, a lot of change has happened, and it's important, isn't it? It's important that we
Mhm.
do have that evolving um, aspect of vulnerability, and keep that in our mindset moving
Yeah.
forward.
I completely agree. And I think there's so many factors that have helped us move forward in the last 10 years. I think the work that the FCA have done in, clearly outlining their expectations, making sure that there are focus and support and working groups in place to, really help organisations understand the lived experience of customers. So there's much more accessible help in that regard in terms of these are the regulatory expectations, but here is some support available to you. I think COVID-19 had a huge impact, particularly from a customer service perspective. I think it was it's a shift that shook all of us. There probably
Mhm.
wasn't not one of us that wasn't impacted in some way or another during that period. And I think that showed us as humans, the things that we took for granted, or we took for granted they weren't easy to access anymore. You couldn't just go out for coffee with your
Mhm.
friend or have a hug with the person that you wanted to. And it really changed things for a lot of people.
Mhm.
But I think particularly in terms of the customer service space is uh, demands went up at that time after, because we were also so vulnerable or we needed different things. It was like, when you were working with a provider or you have a product or a policy or whatever it was you wanted to access, your
Mhm.
expectations of that service were almost very enhanced.
Mhm.
So I think it's all really, really gone full circle.
Mhm.
I think generally people are a lot more aware of their rights and able to vocalize their voice more. I'm not saying that's the same for everybody, but some people have found their voice, and I think COVID-19 has sort of helped them in that regard. I think with regards to the global and economic climate, again, there's not one of us that hasn't been affected by things that have taken place in that regard. And I recognise that there are some good news stories out there, but it's also hard not to be impacted by, the not so nice news stories that we've all seen, such as the wars, cost of living, price increases, and actually just how it feels quite generally hard to get by for a lot of people now. And I think it's almost felt quite close to home for a lot of us. And I think, therefore, it's more of a realization that actually any one of us can become vulnerable at any time. Like life happens to all of us in some way or another.
Mhm.
And that's why we need, we're humans. Ultimately, at some point in our life, we're going to need to put our hands up and say, hey, I need a bit of help. And normal and it's okay to do, and we
Mhm.
should be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, firms are now also looking internally and just thinking, actually, if our customers are impacted and affected by those situations that you mentioned, and actually, it, quite rightly, our colleagues are as well. So
Yeah.
it's firms getting it right for both customers and for colleagues, and making sure that they're yeah, the supporting both, and making sure that they've got those um, accessible, inclusive processes, and that high empathy sort of service for both is really crucial, isn't it? I really
Yeah.
do believe that, and we're seeing that more with our clients, aren't we? They're actually sort of they're coming to us and just saying, actually, yeah, what have you got for our team members? They're under pressure, they're overstretched, they're under resourced. The conversations that they're exposed to are quite harrowing, quite distressing. Because I think you're right. Since COVID, we are seeing more and more customers either pushing back against sort of company firm decisions, or they are then absolutely overwhelmingly sharing information about their lives. Perhaps they're going through trauma, they're experiencing difficult situations, and of course, customer-facing team members are all exposed to that. It's overwhelming. It's hard for them to take, and if they're not able to get those breaks and to step away, or they don't get that support behind the scenes, that's detrimental for them.
Yeah, absolutely. They're hearing so much and they're absorbing it all and then taking
Mm,
that home with them. Yeah, daily. I completely agree. And I think what you said earlier is so key for firms to remember is actually, whilst it's great we put in place support for customers and we're able to identify, challenging circumstances, or vulnerability, and their support needs, that's excellent. But equally, mirroring that for your colleagues and employees as well, in terms of general life, it's probably very likely that if they are supporting a customer with financial difficulty, they too are experiencing some form of
mm.
financial difficulty. There's probably few of us that isn't impacted by what's going on in the
Yeah.
global and worldly climate at the moment. And that like manifests itself in other forms as well, as you've mentioned, such
Mm,
as mental health, resilience, well-being, and for them, being able to do a good job.
yeah. Absolutely. And of course, they're often doing that from home, either from their kitchen table, their bedroom. Potentially they're having these difficult situations in an environment where they're expected to feel safe. It's their safe space, and they don't often have then the colleagues around them to sort of just check in with them. Are you okay? Or for them to just have a bit of a debrief. And I've just had this call. What do I say? What do I do? Um,
Hmm.
and they're missing those really valuable connections.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Mm,
agree. And so important that firms can set up, processes and support for those people who are working from home if they need it.
mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so important. So thinking about, I mean, you mentioned obviously the FCA's have obviously really honed the compliance that they're wanting firms to adhere to. Over the last 10 years, there's been a real change from the occasional paper 8 that was a 2015 through to the fair treatment of vulnerable customers, and then obviously more recently the consumer duty. So there's been a real shift for firms to adhere to those. Do you think that organisations are still seeing vulnerability as a tick box compliance exercise, or do you think that they are really seeing this as actually, do you know what, this is the right thing to do from a moral and ethical point of view? And what are you seeing in that with not just our clients, but sort of outside of those?
Yeah, I would probably say fairly split, or maybe 70-30 to be fair, in terms of 70% of organizations, in my experience, are wanting to do it right. But they also, in terms of obviously meeting regulatory compliance, but they are wanting to do the right thing by humans because it's
Mm,
morally and ethically the right thing to do. They get it. They want to do that. They want to show up for that person in their moment of truth.
mm,
30%, um, I would probably say are are just ticking the boxes, or not seeing beyond the regulatory compliance and really actually taking the time to understand why it's important. Um,
Mhm.
Living like real life lived experiences. So perhaps those are the firms who do have their processes, policies, and frameworks in place to evidence how they may support vulnerable customers. But perhaps what they're not doing is actually working with lived experience groups, charities, gaining external insight. Also, necessarily not using some of their customer feedback to actually really listen to the voices. What are people telling us? What are people going through, and can we support that person or those group of people, their time of need, based on our products and service.
Mhm.
And that takes time and resource to do. Don't get me wrong, I completely understand that. And I know that, cost of living and budgets and restraints affect organizations too, and it's challenging. However, um, in my opinion, if you really want to make a difference and do the right thing for your customers and colleagues, going the extra mile and doing that extra 30% is very much needed.
Mhm. Yeah, completely agree, completely agree. And even just thinking, obviously, when I first set up Helen Pettifer Training sort of 10 years ago, it was predominantly a training company. So it was only training that I delivered right from the outset. And then yeah, as the company grew, we sort of offered resources, we offered the compliance pathways program, so the consultancy services. And it was really the reason they all came into to being is really because I was seeing people come to us and just sort of saying, "Oh, we need vulnerability training," and they were almost seeing it in silo. It's like, well, okay, tick the box, we've trained the staff, and then not sort of really embedding that learning. So it's sort of seen as, yeah, why is it not being embedded? We've delivered that training, but of course they didn't have the processes, the resources, the policies, the sort of real human journey in those lived experiences, as you mentioned. They didn't have any of that to really uphold the training, so of course it often felt flat, and obviously wasn't embedded within the business. So that was sort of really, again, why I brought you on board, because I knew that you'd be able to help me sort of drive that forward. And in our milestones program, training is milestone 3. So when we actually share that with our
Mm.
clients, they kind of go, "Oh, why is training not first?" Well, because you need everything else first for that training to take place and to be upheld, so that it then is embedded into the learning, and it just becomes business as usual. So even just in sort of our journey as a business over the last 10 years, we've really seen what firms need for that training to land effectively, even just for delegates to turn up knowing why are they joining the training. How many people have turned up, so I don't know why I'm here. Because
Mm.
it hasn't been um, sort of articulated well to them. This is part of your job role. This is what we expect you to do. But because it's the right thing to do. So yeah, I just thought I'd share that, because I think that's important too. Is where does that training sit within the whole of that vulnerability compliance journey?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the joining of the dots, isn't it? I
Mm,
completely agree. And especially with staff turnover, people get promotions or they move on to different roles, and the training, you've done it at a moment in time, but that cohort of group of people have changed, as well as
mm,
customers and circumstances that they're being affected by, and you continuously need process or a framework that is continuously, monitoring, okay,
mm,
actually we're at this point, but what's changed retrospectively? Do we need to go back, review what we've done, build on that and change? And again, I completely understand that that's resource and time, but if organizations can have that mechanism within their
yes.
organization, their processes, their frameworks, they will get so much back from it at the end, and it will save them a lot of time in the near future.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, it is. Yeah, ticking the connecting all the dots, as you said.
Hmm.
Yeah, very much so. So we talked briefly about team members and what they're experiencing on the calls. And I think sort of with the more that AI is coming into play as well, and some of those sort of easier tasks and easier conversations that team members would have had in the past, are now sort of being automated, or customers can self-serve on the digital journey. What do you think the toll is on those customer-facing team members, and what do you think they're quietly sort of holding, I guess, in that space, and perhaps not even sharing with their colleagues, or their team leaders?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, quite a few things for me, I think. Again, using my experience and based on what I see and know. Um, I think firstly, just like recognizing, let's all take a moment to recognize that supporting customers, a customer service agent role is actually a demanding role, huge responsibility, huge, huge influencing over your customers and how they go away and speak about your organization based on the service they've experienced. Yet surprisingly, it's often one of the lowest paid entry roles when you enter an organization. So I think there's room there for us as a customer service industry to acknowledge that. And I would encourage firms to take action in the right way to address that. They have a huge responsibility on their shoulders, those frontline agents. I think probably what they quietly take home with them is probably more around the relentlessness of handling call after call or case after case, and probably not knowing when they pick up the phone or pick up a email or a letter, what the customer is going to say to them and what the customer is going to need from them at that moment in time. So a bit like a box of chocolates, you might not know which one you're going to pick up. They're having to change hats all of the time and switch their knowledge up. Okay, right, the customer's asking me this. Let me think. Okay, that's that process. Okay, I need to let them know about this. So they're juggling a lot all of the time. I think probably for me, one of the main things that I see agents take home is actually when they're handling emotionally charged or distressing calls, is that they will handle that call probably to the best of their ability and then move on to the next one because they are, internally, am I meeting my targets? Am I doing enough today? Is my manager going to be happy with me at the end of the week, month, day? But actually, whilst they've been doing all of that, they've probably been having some really difficult and challenging conversations that nobody else can hear them having because they are the only person speaking to that customer. They may be spoken to sometimes rudely or aggressively, not in the right, respectable way. And they probably just think that a lot of that is part of the job. So, I need to I just need to take that. I just need to listen to the customer speak to me like that. Or actually I've just taken a call with a customer and what I've heard is actually really traumatizing. They're internalizing it, but they might be parking it to move on to the next call. But actually, 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whenever they finish, they take they're taking that home with them. Or it might be they're going home to put their kids to bed. So they're going into mum dad mode or whatever, parent mode, whatever that might be. They then go to sleep, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. It's churning around their mind. And that possibly could be causing trauma, internalized trauma to them as well, and having an impact, knock-on impact to their resilience and well-being. Um, so there's so many things at play here. I could go on forever about this topic, and things that agents are taking home with them that will then be affecting them in their personal lives as well as their working lives. As well as whilst I'm on this call or I'm serving this customer, right, let me remember, am I following the right process? Have I asked the customer how they like to be addressed today? Or have I done enough to pass my quality checks? There's so much. It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. You could probably see me nodding all the way through that because, yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And also, as well, what we're hearing from our clients is they're also very young demographic as well, sort of 18 to 24. So they may not also be having those life experiences. They can't sort of personally connect with potentially what the customer is sharing, because they might still be living at home. They're not sure, well, I don't know how much our electricity bill is at home because mum and dad pay that. So they haven't got
Mhm.
that sort of personal lived experience that they can really fully connect to perhaps what that customer is experiencing. So I completely agree. And there were a couple of things that I wanted to share that have come out from the training delegates that attend the training courses. Um, the first one is very much what you were saying about actually they're taking it home with them. And a lot of delegates are saying to me, especially in our suicidal customer conversations training course, they're saying, um, but I want to do more. I want to do more to be able to support this customer. Where does my responsibility end? Um,
Mm.
and often they're taking those calls home and they're going to sort of think, oh, but maybe I could have done this and maybe I could have done that. And, is there anything else that we can do internally? Should I have signposted? All of these that, especially as well, people go into customer service purely because they care. So, they want to do the best for that person. So I know that that's definitely something delegates are sharing with me. What else could I have done? And the likelihood is nothing, because they've done everything that they possibly could in their job role and their responsibility. They've signposted internally, they've signposted externally, but it's that reassurance that actually you've done everything you possibly could, which perhaps they may not be getting from their colleagues or from their team leaders. So that was one thing extra that I wanted to share. And the other one, again from delegates, is I'm just checking in with them as we go through the training. Are you able to step away from your desk, from the telephones, when you have taken a really difficult call? um, and I would say 99% of the delegates say yes, they're able to step away, so there is no sort of undue pressure to stay at your desk. Not from their team leaders, not from the firms, not from the organisations that they work for. However, what I'm seeing is that they're putting that pressure on themselves, because they know that, do you know what, the customer service team were under-resourced. If I step away for a 5-10 minute break, that then leaves my colleagues picking up those calls. So that's going to put extra pressure on my colleagues, and I'm not going to throw my colleagues under the bus just because I need to step away. So a lot of people are not taking those reset times purely because they're thinking, I'm not doing that to my colleagues. I don't know if
Mm.
you've came across that when you were in that environment.
Yeah, I do. I think particularly if I think back to when I was in that environment, it was traditionally in an office because it was
Mm,
pre-COVID. But they're probably, even though you knew that you could do that, or even though, clients tell me that they know they can do that, they do feel that stigma or that shame
mm,
almost, like I need to go away and take a break. Um, and just that responsibility, like you say, Helen, is not
mm,
not wanting to let your colleagues down because
mm,
they know it's busy. So I think it's really key that leaders and firms are really recognizing that or recognize the importance of going back to their teams and just saying, if you need a break, that's okay.
mm,
um just go for it. It's no problem. Take the time you need because it's normal. um and we all need that
yeah.
as humans. And I expect equally for perhaps some people who are watching this, they perhaps are working at home and they're not on the front line, but equally they might have a stressful day. And I think we can all probably put our hands up and say, we'll just go for a walk around the block or a run or get a sandwich,
Yes.
whatever it might be,
Yeah.
with no qualms or questions or
Mm,
shame. So absolutely, why should that space and culture and environment not be created for
mm,
customer agents to do so? And even if it is created, there's probably, what I'm hearing is still a barrier for those agents in
mm.
feeling comfortable to do that.
Yeah. So again, it comes back to sort of that culture, and the moral and ethical duty, not just for customers but for team members as well. It's doing the right thing, because again, they're humans, as well, and they need to be looked after and supported, very much
Yeah.
so.
And just going back to one other point you raised, Helen, around the question you get from delegates is, was there anything else I could have done for that customer
Mm,
in that situation? Um, it's great that they're asking you because they're obviously wanting your expertise and insight to enhance their skills and knowledge. Equally, are they asking that question because, like you say, they might not have necessarily received that reassurance
Mm,
from their organization or their leader or whoever it is? And actually, within a role of customer service agent, your role is only within your remit. You, with the
mm,
nicest will in the world, cannot help everybody. You can lead a horse to water. You can't solve everybody's problems. But agents probably do just need that feedback loop to say, do you know what? That sounded like a really difficult call you took there. It sounded like you did everything you can. Are you
mm,
okay? Do you want to chat about it?
yeah,
Or whatever that support might look like. And equally for, people that are working from home is just to check in during the day, whether that's a text message or a WhatsApp or, you know, an MSN, hey, just wanted to see how your day was going today. Is there anything you
mm,
need from me? Um, you know, just checking you're okay, not micromanaging you.
yeah,
Here if you need anything, you know,
yes,
creating that
yes,
space for that person to be like, oh, actually, yeah, I'm working from home today. My husband's out, or my mum and dad's out. Yeah, actually, I've
mm,
taken a really difficult call. I'm going to take 5 minutes. Or actually, yeah, I would like to speak to you about it. Is that okay?
mm,
So
yeah.
important.
Absolutely. And that connection is absolutely right, isn't it? Yeah, just that check-in as throughout the day and making sure that it is coming from a place of good intention. It is not, yeah, sort of in the guise of micromanaging. It is purely actually,
Absolutely.
do you know what? I really do care. I really do want to support you. Absolutely. Especially if they know that colleague's going through something difficult themselves. We talk about vulnerability in customers, but yeah, the likelihood is that colleagues are going through bereavement, divorce, financial difficulty, ongoing health conditions, all of those, So it's yeah, really checking in with team members and making sure, yeah, I'm here. Um, and I guess as well, it's it's not leaving it to that team member to tell the the team manager. It's it's yeah, because often sort of we can say, oh yeah, let me know if you need anything, but actually sometimes people might not be able to articulate that. They might not have the courage or the energy to sort of say, actually, do you know what, I need help. So it is then creating that opportunity and just sort of saying, right, let's just catch up for 5-10 minutes. How are you doing? you know what can I do to help? So maybe being a little bit more proactive from a team leader's point of view, just doing that, because actually if that team member is overwhelmed, if they are stretched, if they are worried about dropping balls and things like that, then the likelihood is they're not going to reach out for help.
Yeah, that's so true. So true. And I think normalizing it from a leader's perspective as well. So if they are having that conversation with their team members, oh, do you know what? I had a right day of it yesterday.
Mm.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna make sure I
totally.
have an easy day today
Yes.
headspace. And
Mm,
whilst that might not be the case for their teams necessarily, but I'm gonna take 5 minutes today, I think
mm,
you should too, or I'm gonna take half an hour
yes.
today.
Yeah.
Why don't you go? I'm going to go and get a coffee and cake, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to start work.
Yes.
Normalizing it
Mm,
as well is so
yeah.
important.
So important, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. So, but I think we could just talk for hours, couldn't we, about all of the vulnerability space. I'm conscious of the time, but so thinking about sort of what's gone on over the last 10 years, what do you think is going to happen over the next 10 years? What do you think vulnerability will look like? What do you think that support will look like as we move forward into the next decade?
Yeah, wow. Well, that's an
Big
interesting and
question.
terrifying question at the same time. Um, yeah, so okay, so so many thoughts around this. So my first thought is primarily if we think where we are today, moving forward 10 years, the moment we're entering the world of AI era, a lot of testing going on, some people using it for the first time, and also equally a lot of people asking us, what are your thoughts? Have you seen, any examples of where it's working really, really well? Um, there is no doubt that AI is going to have its place in the next 10 years and our, futures to come. Um, so my view is that it will be used a lot more in terms of, I think organizations will have it embedded into their platform systems where, a customer interaction is happening and keywords phrases are perhaps being used, and it's triggering support options for both customers and agents to use, which will be helpful for both. I'm sure. However, I do still very much see the agent is going to be needed. So there's always going to need to be a humanized service. And ultimately in that process, it is going to be the agent, the human, that will be able to tailor the individual or specific outcome for the customer and create that experience for the customer, not an AI robotic journey. So I think firms are really going to need to um, carefully map those journeys and make sure that there are appropriate handoff points to agents where that's needed. However, based on what I see and hear at the moment, I think that perhaps a lot of organisations or senior leaders, board boards might think, right, we'll implement AI and it's going to save us X amount of money. It's going to give the customer a quicker journey, and ultimately, we won't need as many people, so to speak. I don't think that is going to be the case, and I think they will quite quickly realise sooner rather than later that there's a place for both. By all means, I'm not saying that all organizations necessarily think that, but they are really going to need to nurture that there is a place for both. I think also in terms of vulnerability and support needs, obviously the world we live in is ever changing. We all know that. um, I think vulnerability and needs are always going to evolve. It's never going to be one and done. If you think we've had COVID, that was 6 years ago, without being doom and gloom, we don't know what's coming next and what crisis or event we're going to need to respond to and support. Um, and I think though with that, actually the term vulnerability and knowing that we need to support customers is more recognized. So I think it's actually just going to be really normalized in customer service. So at the moment, what I see is a lot of specialist teams or vulnerability teams and vulnerability champions, which is fantastic and excellent. But not all organizations have those. And I think going forward, that actually having specialists, triage teams, vulnerability champions, etc., is just going to be part of BAU, and you're going to need it to deliver an excellent customer service. And actually, customers will just expect that you have that in place. They are going to be expecting that level of service and support. I think also you touched on generations earlier. Different generations are going to be at play in 10 years' time. So perhaps those younger generations are dealing with customers now. They're going to, have different experiences in 10 years' time. So I think that firms are going to need to factor in and also journey map how do those generations skills, expertise, how is that going to influence our customer service, and what are we going to need to use and pull on at different times. I don't know if I explained that very well, but I think that in itself is a
I
whole
know what you mean.
fascinating
Yes, yeah, the five
piece that,
generations in the
oh,
workplace. Yeah,
yeah,
it's so interesting, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
should be looked at. But I think it's going to be really normal and expected, and it's not just going to be regulatory compliance. I think we're going to see a real shift.
Brilliant. So exciting to see, but obviously still got a long way to go. Yeah. Yeah, lots. And I
Definitely.
completely agree with the AI. I think you're absolutely right. I think I recently delivered a toolkit session on sort of, are we losing the human touch? And that was it was really interesting to research it and to sort of see, where AI sits within the role of customer service. And it's interesting to see tech firms saying AI plus human. I turned it on its head for the toolkit and I said, actually, human plus AI. So actually, we're never going to ever get rid of the human element. So it's got to be human elements first with AI supporting them. So even just the way that we position sort of AI and human AI. That's important because the greater emphasis needs to be on the human element with that support of AI in the background. Yeah, completely agree.
Absolutely.
Um, and
I
then just a
mean,
couple of things that I thought was around sort of the mental health crisis. I think that's not going to go away. People are leading very, very busy lives, but they're often very overwhelmed. So I think we need to be prepared that the conversations that we're going to get from customers are going to be far more emotive. So we need to be upskilling frontline teams to be able to manage those and to build up their resilience before they have those conversations, but also to make sure that they navigate support once they've had that conversation. And my other thought was around, actually, you mentioned around the generations, just thinking actually in 10 years' time, we're all going to be 10 years older. Um, I'll scary to say I'll be 62, so that's super scary. Um, but of course, older people, we're living much older now, so we're going to have a larger demographic of older people who, with that, we can't assume that they're going to be vulnerable because of their age, but it does bring a then, age-related health conditions, age-related situations and things like that. So those were just two of the thoughts that I had around sort of what vulnerability might look like. I don't know if they've come up in client conversations or something that you've been considering.
yeah, absolutely. Especially around, I think the older, the generally living older, and caring for parents, or
Yeah.
your grandparents, you know, pensions. Did we invest enough early? People,
Mm,
we're living
yes.
longer, we're running out of money,
Yeah.
financial difficulty. You touched on obviously the mental health, and support needs. I think absolutely, for customers, absolutely, but I think equally, for employees. So, you take Gen Z, we're very much aware, or perhaps more open now to discussing, I'm suffering with anxiety, or mental health challenges, whatever it might be. But actually, when those people go to work for firms, they expect that support to be put in place for them. Like it's
Mm,
just an expectation now.
yes.
So equally in that regard as well for employees as well as customers, um, I think the expectations for deliverance on all things customer service, but it's beyond customer service.
Mm,
It's how are you going to
yeah.
support me when I'm in financial hardship? How are you going to support me when I'm not having a such good day?
Mm,
You know, Firms need to cater for that in
yes.
both regards, and that's quite fascinating and interesting. I think
Mm.
for us as a world.
Yes, perhaps that could be another podcast episode that we sort of bring to life later then, because I think that is, yeah, expectations of the workforce and the different generations of the workforce, but actually, yeah, what firms need to be mindful of when
Yeah,
supporting everyone in their teams. Yeah,
absolutely.
meaty topic.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but but
There's
important. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
agree.
So I'm conscious that we've come to the end of our time. As I said, I mean, we could probably talk about this for hours, and I know that when we do get together, we do just sort of spark each other off
We
with,
do.
we don't stop talking to about vulnerability. So it's
Nope.
just such a fascinating topic, and I just feel so privileged to have sort of fallen into this space, and just really sort of every day I'm learning, every day I'm hearing different lived experiences. I just feel really privileged to be able to create space for people to be able to share that and to explore that topic, and for you to come on board as in the team as well to share your expertise and knowledge as well has just been brilliant. So thank you for joining the team and thank you
You're
for
welcome.
all that you've done. So yeah. Um,
Thank you for
so
having me.
so any final thoughts you'd like to share with the listeners just before we sort of bring the episode to a close?
Yeah, I think, just in terms of when you think about the job role you're doing, so if you are in customer service, we never get out of bed to do a bad job. And actually you'll be facing challenges in your life, and some days you just won't necessarily feel like you have the energy or, perhaps empathy to be able to support people. And I think if you do, just acknowledge that that's okay, sort of like lean into those feelings. And just put your hand up for help, and ask for support if you can, would be my first tip, because that saying, you can't, drink from an empty cup, is very much true when you're delivering customer service. And equally, if there's any leadership teams listening to this, is just really sort of, think about, are the things that you do in your day-to-day working day really setting up and supporting your teams when they perhaps need you most? Even just ask them, what do you need from me? Or how will I know, when you're having perhaps a not so good day? What's your preferred method of contact? Just asking some real sort of basic questions can really help to create that trust, to know that your colleagues can get support from you, if they need to. And I'd probably say for like executive teams and board teams, if you're listening to this, um, we're very busy in day-to-day roles. Is probably just really take the time to go back to your frontline teams and actually sit with them, or perhaps have a cup of tea with them, whatever it might be, and really get to know some of the challenges that they're up against when they're speaking to customers. Give them that time, spend your time with them, and I really think that you'll be surprised by what you find and what you see. And perhaps just ask the question, if this were my loved one speaking with my firm today, would I be happy with the level of service they've received or the way that they're being treated? um, and I think, in terms of everything that's gone on in the world with the past 10 years, is just us remembering that as humans we're all susceptible to vulnerability. Anything can change for any one of us anytime. You never know what's around the corner, and it doesn't take a lot to be a nice human. And just my phrase, I guess, is just help a human when a human needs helping, quite simply.
I love that. Absolutely love that, Jenna. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those such powerful thoughts, and yeah, absolutely mirror my thoughts. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And just thank you for being a guest today on the very first episode back, in the new series. So and we've got an amazing year to look forward to, haven't we, this year? We've got the conference that's happening later this year, which we're super excited about, and lots more products and services coming. So it's going to be an incredible year, and I'm just thrilled to be spending it with you and the rest of the team here at Helen Pettifer Training. So thank you for being a guest today.
You're so welcome, Helen. Thank you for having me. And I'm really looking forward to seeing your future podcast guests as well. So
Yes,
always so much to learn from everybody. So yeah, thank you.
and we've got some good ones lined up as well, so I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to that as well. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Unlocking Vulnerability. If today's conversation has resonated with you, please feel free to share it with others who may find it useful. You'll find more episodes like this by searching Unlocking Vulnerability wherever you listen to podcasts. If this episode has left you with questions about any aspect of consumer vulnerability, I regularly host free Q&A sessions on Zoom where you're welcome to join the conversation. You can find out more at helenpettifer.com. Thank you for listening, and please take care.